Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kate Zullo. I am the educator for the Litchfield Historical Society, and this is the second lecture that we are doing in partnership with the Women's Forum. And this is basically a partnership that the Women's Forum addressed, came to us to sort of offer programs while we are not meeting in person. So if you were with us last week, we did things that go bump in the night. And tonight we are here, or this afternoon really, we're here for this really important talk about mental health. And this is about mental health for adolescents, but really I'm sure there are going to be lessons for all of us, right? Because this has been a really challenging time for the mental health of our whole community. Before I introduce our speaker for today, I just want to give a quick recognition to the Connecticut Humanities Council. They are supporting this program with a very generous grant as they support many programs across the state. So let me just sorry, I'm keeping up with letting people into the room. So I want to take a moment to welcome Jennifer and to thank you, Jennifer, for being here this afternoon and to give us this talk. Jennifer is a graduate of Fordham University. She holds MSW and I recently learned that actually stands for Masters of Social Work. So she holds a Masters in Social Work, and she is the director of the Wellness Center programs at Connecticut Junior Republic. So Jennifer, thank you so much for being with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I see a few familiar faces. Hello. But yeah, great to be here. And, you know, I certainly, while most of you know, we work primarily with children and adolescents here, I really geared this talk towards mental health in general today. So I hope that while we kind of certainly will touch on children and children's mental health, that really we will kind of be able to kind of look at how this applies to everybody here in the room as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I had stopped sharing it so that everybody could see themselves as they were popping in, but I will go ahead and share my screen. All right. So thank you, Kate. Oh, are you getting an echo when I talk? Are you hearing an echo? No? Okay. So as Kate said, I'm the director of behavioral health here at CJR, and most of you are probably very familiar with CJR, that we are a mental health providing agency for children and families. And we're here in Litchfield and are probably best known for our schools and for our residential programming over the years, and maybe a little less known for our outpatient behavioral health. Started about 6 years ago. And we started that program in order to really be able to truly serve the entire community, right? So our schools and our residential facilities are really for a specific population and don't necessarily serve the communities that we're in. And so our behavioral health system really came about so that we could serve truly every child and family in the communities that we serve. We also, you know, serve transitional age youth. We can serve adults so that we are able to serve the parents of the kids that we work with, you know, guardians, older siblings, grandparents, any family members of the children that we serve. And I'm really excited to be able to bring this topic to you because if there's anything that COVID has taught us, is that mental health impacts every single person. If every single one of us in this room right now thinks about how our own lives have been impacted over the last 2 years, or our family members' lives over the past 2 years, I think we probably can all recognize, if not ourselves, someone in our lives who has been struggling, right? And I think pre-COVID, mental health was one of those things that was kind of not talked about as often, or maybe it was a kind of a not me thing, right? Or it was stigmatized in some ways. And I think what COVID has done, for good or bad, is that it has put it out there that we all need support, and it's really put it on the forefront of people's minds. And with that, it's gotten a lot of national attention. It's got a lot of you know, public attention. People who never paid attention to it, people who thought I never needed help, suddenly are finding themselves needing help. And so it's wonderful, but it's also put a burden on the system. And so we're going to talk a little bit about kind of those two pieces today. Okay. So I'm going to start by talking about kind of the mental health, state of mental health in general, and then going to move it more into some specifics and some stuff that I hope that you can apply to your own lives and to those that you know. And then at the end, I will open this up for any questions, comments that you might have. You can feel free to unmute at that point and ask, or if you're more comfortable using the chat, you can do that as well. Okay. So I really like this quote, and I thought this was a great place to start today, is that if you only knew how many people were barely holding it together, you might be a little kinder. And I think that has really been like a theme of the last couple of years, is that sometimes people feel like they're barely holding on by a shoestring. And if we all need to, give each other a little bit of grace, right? And put ourselves in other people's shoes and think about what other people might be going through. And so I thought that was a really nice place for us to start this presentation today. So what is mental health? Mental health really is the foundation of everything we do, right? As the quote says, it's a springboard of our thinking, of our communication skills, of our learning, of our growing, of our self-esteem. And when we're not feeling good mentally, all of these things suffer, right? And so when we think about, our children and our youth, right? When we know that they're not doing well mentally, and then we send them to school and we expect them to learn, right? Or as adults, and you had to go to work, right? And maybe focus on things,
Okay.
Can everybody, so a few people not muted, we're getting some feedback. There we go. Okay. So really we want to think about when we're strong and our mental health is strong, when we're in a good place mentally, we are in a much better place to communicate with others, right? Think about yourselves for a minute. Like if you're ever just like not having a good day and then you snap at somebody, right? Your communication skills are not at their best, right? We don't learn as well. We don't grow. We're not as resilient. And we all have emotions, right? What we want to really think about when we talk about mental health is we're not saying emotions are bad. Emotions are good, right? It's when emotions become too much, right? So we all experience emotions such as worry and fear and sadness and stress and anxiety, right? Those are all part of day-to-day life. But most of the time they're short-lived. They don't impact our everyday functioning for long periods of time. And we're able to bounce back, right? And we're able to move back on to kind of a status quo. Where we start to really concern about mental health is when these really start to interfere with our day-to-day life. When we find that it's lasting an extended period of time, maybe it's impacting our relationships with others. This might be a sign that maybe we're starting to struggle with mental health more than we think. So there's a lot of things you say, well, why do some people struggle with mental health and why don't some people, right? Why have some people kind of breezed through these last couple of years pretty well unscathed while other people are really, really struggling, right? And a lot of this comes down to predisposition, right? So people can have a biological predisposition and they can have environmental factors that can make them more or less likely to bounce back, more or less likely to develop a mental health disorder. Biological factors, things that are part of our chemical makeup, right? Our brain chemistry, our genes, family history of mental health disorders. These are all things that can predispose. They're not a guarantee, but they can predispose us to mental health conditions, okay? But environmental factors are also a huge, huge piece of this, right? And they can range the whole spectrum from birth complications to drug and alcohol exposure to discrimination and racism, unsafe living conditions, abuse and neglect, any of these things that can cause long-term stress, right? If you look at the diagram over on the right-hand side, where we are, our society, our environment, our community, our family, these are all factors, right? That can either help us or hinder us in our mental state. And one of the things that we have seen in the past 2 years is that COVID has brought on long-term stress, right? As we know, I would love to say we're in a post-pandemic phase, but I'm not really sure where we are right now. It's been a long haul, and this has become long-term stress that everyone is experiencing, and this is causing a drastic rise in mental health concerns, right? And so then you couple that with perhaps people who do have biological predispositions, right? or people who, look at this other list that's on the side here, like people who are in situations that are unsafe living conditions, who are, victims of abuse and neglect, who are, facing socioeconomic stressors. All of these, coupled with now the long-term effects of COVID, make these people even more predisposed, right? We were really worried, we are really worried throughout this pandemic about children who are not in safe homes, who are in situations where there's abuse and neglect happening, where school was their safety net, right? School was their escape every day. And now they were basically stuck home in these environments for over a year, right? That was adding to our concerns about these kids' mental health, right? Same thing with adults, people who were in unsafe living conditions, domestic violence relationships, people who were losing their jobs. All of these things coupled with the long-term impact of COVID. So in June of 2020, the CDC reported that 31% of the respondents who they surveyed had symptoms of anxiety, depression. 13% were reporting an increase in substance abuse. 26% were reporting increased stress-related symptoms. 11% were had thoughts of suicide in the last 30 days. And these numbers are double what they were pre-pandemic. And there's all sorts of things that lead to that. A lot of the things I was just talking about: food insufficiency, financial concerns, loneliness, uncertainty, and day by day, these things would build. And our youth have had a totally different experience. For you and I sitting in this room, probably for most of us, we've had life experience. We know what life was like pre-COVID. We have, most days, I think I have the mental capacity to say, this will pass, life will resume, right? But for a child, their whole world changed, right? And for many of these kids, they have a hard time knowing what comes next, because this is a lot of their childhood memory, right? Like I think about like our real little ones, our kindergartners, our first graders. These kids had never gone to preschool. They had never gone to kindergarten. They don't have a lot of memory pre-pandemic, right? So for our youth, their worlds really changed. They couldn't attend school. They couldn't interact with their friends. They can't play sports. The loss of life events, right? Proms, graduations, and while those might feel like first world problems, and in some ways maybe they are, they're rites of passage. They're really important transitions in life. And suddenly we're losing those things. Kids saw their parents losing jobs, food insecurity, being stuck at home, and like I said, in bad situations, family members passing away. It became a really...
You froze, Jennifer.
Uh-oh.
We can't hear you.
I think you're okay, Jennifer. I think you're good.
Okay. So yeah, these became some really uncertain times. And one of the things we know about protective factors in mental health, and we know about trauma and the impact of trauma, is that one of the things that is a preventative of that is the feeling of control. And one of the things that trauma does for us is it takes away control. And that makes you feel like life is very uncertain, right? And that with that really can enhance our anxiety and our depression when we feel like we can't control what's going on in our lives. And especially for kids who don't have a lot of control in their life to begin with, right? Because they're at the mercy of the adults in their lives. When they see all of this going on, now they really feel like, what is happening, right? The world isn't safe, right? Nothing around me is predictable or safe anymore. So in a study of 80,000 youth that reported during the pandemic, 25% of them reported depressive and anxiety symptoms. And according to the emergency departments across the country, suicide attempts were 51% higher for girls and 4% higher for boys in early 2021 as compared to the same time in 2019. And that is alarming. That we have that many youth that are like, I don't see this getting better. I don't see a light at the end of this tunnel. And feeling like this is where they're at, that they're that desperate. So with all of this, what have we done? Where are we at? Oops, sorry. when the pandemic hit, as here at CJR, we had this clinic. We have about 550 active children and families in our clinic right now. And we had to figure out really quick, how do we turn this around on a dime? How do we keep providing services in this really critical time as a system? But now while everybody is home and isolated. And so some of the things that we did, and that this our state did really, really well, that, is we made a very fast move to telehealth, right? Just like we're all sitting here on Zoom today. I remember sitting in a meeting here on campus on March 10th saying, what are we going to do? And by March 15th, we were fully on telehealth, right? And that was partly because we had the support of our agency, but partly because the state got behind us, Medicaid got behind us and said, we are going to kind of get rid of all the red tape right now, and we're going to just let this happen. So we were able to get set up on a platform. We were able to get, the links out to people, and we were able to make it happen. A lot of insurance companies started waiving copays for mental health, which was huge. I don't think that will last, but that was something that they were really, able to do so that families could access mental health treatment without any barriers, because we all know that, commercial insurances have high copays, they have high deductibles, and that is often a barrier to mental health services in general. Unlike your medical doctor, where most of the time you don't go weekly, you go, periodically. So the copay, while it can be a burden, it's not a huge issue. Whereas with mental health, you're often coming to services at least weekly. And so if you have a high copay or you have a high deductible, that really becomes a barrier to service, especially if you have multiple family members. I can't tell you how many times I've heard a parent say, I know I need services, but so does my child, and I can't afford both of us. So my child's more important, right? So the waiving of copays, that was a huge thing that I can honestly say, I think across the board, all commercial insurances did. So that was really, really big. Another thing that happened, and this is kind of a double-edged sword, they eased HIPAA regulations. So, things like when we do telehealth sessions, okay, we need to use a platform that's HIPAA compliant, meaning, the data that's going across it is secure. And when this all happened, we didn't have enough infrastructure in this country, in this state, to support that in a HIPAA compliant way that quickly. And so they lifted a lot of that instantly, and you were able to use things like FaceTime and Skype. Again, I say it's a double-edged sword because it got us to the people, but that HIPAA piece and that privacy and confidentiality piece was certainly a concern. And I can say that we chose not to go that route. We used the HIPAA compliant platform the whole time, but it was really nice to know that for smaller agencies, that people could do this without the accrued expense of having to have a platform that was HIPAA compliant. They eased licensing restrictions. We have, myself as a licensed clinical social worker, I have clinicians under me who are not licensed yet. I have interns under me, all do fabulous work. But there's all sorts of regulations typically about who can do what. And they really kind of set all hands on deck, right? Like if you've got, the education, if you've got the right supervision in place, whether you're an intern or you're licensed, right now, we just want to get support to the people. And so they waived a lot of those licensing requirements temporarily. Typically, you would graduate with your degree, and then you have to take a licensing exam in order to be able to continue to provide services. Well, that was impossible because all the testing centers were closed. And so they quickly realized that, and they said, okay, we're going to give everybody a 6-month waiver on their tests. We just want to get mental health providers out there to the people. Okay, so that was really great. And I think just an increased awareness. I mean, just like we're all talking about this now, I don't know 2 years ago that we would be sitting here having a discussion about mental health, right? It made the news. Everybody was talking about it. And so that increased awareness, increased access. And so as we move forward, of the American Rescue Plan, there's about $4 million that was slated for mental health services here in Connecticut. And there's a lot of things that they're trying to now figure out what to do with this money. But some of the things that they're really trying to look at is to increase the workforce, because with this huge demand, there's not enough people to do the work, right? So they're really trying to increase the workforce by looking at licensing requirements, by helping with tuition reimbursement, some of these things so that we can get more mental health practitioners out in the field faster. They're trying to increase bed capacity, whether, that's, I'm sure you guys have all seen all over the news that there's this shortage in ER beds everywhere. We've sent kids to the ER and they literally sit in hallways in the ERs for days, and don't receive services. And then the parents end up saying, forget it, we're going home. And I get it, right? Like, I mean, as a parent, how long are you going to sit in a hallway in an ER and wait and hope for services, right? So increasing bed capacity. A big thing is getting the services to where the people are. So getting into schools, getting into pediatricians' offices, and you guys have probably heard a lot about this lately too, and CJR, we started this pre-pandemic, we were in some schools, and now we're in more and more schools, and we're opening clinics in schools across the state for this reason. There are so many barriers to services for families, work schedules, multiple kids with appointments, lack of transportation, you name it. And so when we can get services in the school buildings, we can serve more families and we can take away those barriers. And so, we've been doing it on a since pre-pandemic, like I said, on a very relational micro level, right? Connections with schools that we have in this area. But now you're really starting to see funding for that. You're starting to see a system. I don't know what that system's going to look like yet. And I don't think the state really does yet either, but you're starting to see more and more talk about these integrated systems. So with that kind of like umbrella and, kind of where we're at, I think it paints a little bit of a bleak picture on one hand, like we're not in a good place, right? It's been a long couple of years. But there's also some positive on the other side. There's the awareness. There is the fact that there is funding behind this, and that we are hopefully starting to come out of this. So the question I ask all of you guys to start thinking about for yourselves and your own families and the people is, how have you fared on this pandemic roller coaster? I can't think of any other way to put it than has been truly a roller coaster, right? And how do we take back control, right? We have all had this loss of control, like I was talking about a few slides ago. How do we take back this control? Mouse would work. Here we go. Okay. So there's a couple things I want you guys to start to think about. The first thing is surge capacity, right? So this concept of surge capacity refers to our ability to adapt and survive in a short-term, intensely stressful situation, right? Think about something stressful has happened in your life. You're like, okay, I got this. I know it's going to pass. It's going to be an awful couple of days, an awful couple of weeks, but I'm going to get through this, right? And that's kind of where I think as a society we were, at the beginning of the pandemic. Like think back, way back, right? When we were like organizing and we're like, oh, we got more time to like clean closets now, and we were hoarding toilet paper and we were we had all this energy, right? And we were like, go, go, go. We were buying hand sanitizer, right? We were ready to like tackle this storm, right? But as it went on, as the months dragged on, what happened? You started to feel fatigued, right? By all the changes. You were lacking patience, right? Like the long haul, it just seemed like it was never ending. You felt like you were pushing yourself to keep up emotionally and physically. And what that was you had reached that surge capacity. You had surged, you had done all the things, and now you're like, no, I'm not hoarding toilet paper anymore. I don't care, right? I'm done. And that's where we started to kind of have that come down that we all thought that was going to last 2 weeks, right? I remember packing up my office and saying, oh, we'll be back in 2 weeks, right? That slowly kind of faded into the sunset, and we really had hit our surge capacity. We were tired, right? And so with that, a new word has kind of arisen. And I don't know if you guys have heard this, but the idea of languishing. And I took this from a New York Times article because I thought it was great, that it's the middle child of mental health. And there was an article not that long ago in the New York Times, and it said, I'll just read it. It says, at first, I didn't recognize the symptoms that we all had in common. Friends mentioned that they were having trouble concentrating. Colleagues reported that even with vaccines on the horizon, they were not excited about 2021. A family member was staying up too late to watch National Treasure again, even though she had known the movie by heart, and insisted instead of bouncing out of bed at 6 a.m., we were laying there until 7 playing words with friends. It wasn't burnout. We still had energy. It wasn't depression. We didn't feel hopeless. We just felt somewhat joyless, aimless. And it turns out there's a name for that, languishing, right? Languishing is a sense of stagnation and of emptiness. It feels as if you're muddling through your days, looking at your life through a foggy windshield. And it might be the dominant emotion of 2021. I don't know anybody else, but I think those are pretty good sum up. So we all have this feeling of languishing, right? This new word we learned this year. When does that become more? We hit that surge capacity. We're all in this period of languishing. When does it become more? When are these feelings not lifting? Is this ever going to be better? Am I okay? And these are the questions we want to start to ask ourselves, and we want to ask those around us. Are we seeing this? Because if we're seeing this, this is when we might start to say, this is becoming more. So anxiety and depression, when it's becoming more, when are we starting to see signs of anxiety and depression? And what are signs of anxiety and depression, right? So some signs of anxiety: feeling restless, wound up and on edge, right? Easily fatigued, having difficulty concentrating, your mind going blank, being irritable, muscle tension, difficulty controlling your feelings of constant worry, having trouble sleeping or falling asleep or staying asleep, or just waking up feeling unsatisfied with your sleep, right? Heart racing, sweaty palms, tightness in your chest. Now you're probably all sitting there saying, oh no, I've had these things. Do I have anxiety? It's not any one of these things, right? But it's, are you seeing a trend? Are you starting to see more and more of these things pop up in your life, or in someone you know's life that maybe wasn't there before, that's not going away? No, one night's sleep, not so much. You haven't slept in a month, right? That might be something to worry about, right? Okay. Some things that might trigger anxiety, right? The uncertainty and the unknown, like I've talked about. Change, conflict, volatility, feeling like something is out of your control, trauma reminders, feeling conflicted or guilty. This is a big one, actually. Feeling, and this is kind of like Kate, you and I were talking about it before we got on today, like that, almost that feeling of guilt now, like that you appreciated the slower pace of life. You kind of liked not interacting with people sometimes. And now you're not super excited to like come back to everything. And that all of these things, you know, if you have long-term anxiety, can lead to depression. If you are constantly anxious and you're constantly feeling all these things, that they can then lead to depression. So some signs of depression. And again, don't feel like, oh my God, I was sad, I must be depressed. These are all things that coupled together over time, would start to be indicators. So sad or depressed mood, reduced interest in activities that you used to once enjoy, loss of sexual desire, changes in appetite or unintentional weight gain or weight loss, sleeping too little, sleeping too much. So again, those extremes that are different than your norm, right? Agitation, restlessness, irritability, slowed movement, slowed speech, fatigue, loss of energy, feelings of worthlessness or guilt, difficulty thinking and concentrating, or maybe making decisions, not knowing what's right. I think we've had a lot of that, too, like, what do I feel around the masks or the vaccines or in person or virtual, right? These decisions that became really hard to make. Obviously, reoccurrent thoughts of death and suicide, right, would be the most extreme. So what can you do? If you're kind of looking at these lists, and you're like, I know someone who maybe exhibits some of these, or maybe I have, or, what do? You want to be aware of what you're surrounding yourself with, first of all, right? You want to, right now, turn on any news outlet, go on social media, talk to a friend. Sometimes it's a toxic relationship. There is so much information coming at us right now. We want to make sure that we are really limiting that negative input that's coming into our brain and knowing when to shut it off, right? So observe your input, observe your environment. What is in your control? What is out of your control? And try to focus on the things you can control. And that's where you want to put your energy, right? That's going to help. So I'm going to show you a quick little video. This is Susannah Winters, and she talks about self-care. One of the things that when I talk about what you can do, one of the things we talk about is self-care. And it's like it's a buzzword, it's everywhere. And we talk about, and people are like, I don't have time, right? What is self-care? And we have these ideas that like self-care means I must go to the gym every single day, or I must go take this lavish vacation, and sometimes that would be wonderful, but that isn't day-to-day self-care, right? And that's when we say, well, I'm failing at self-care because I can't do that, right? But what does day-to-day self-care look like and day-to-day self-care mean? And it's so important right now. So I'm going to take a minute and show you this video. I hope. Oops. Give me 1 second because it's not playing my link. So give me 1 second.
You booked a sunny Verbo ski chalet with endless views of snow-covered peaks. But the
All right, here we go.
When was the last time you were stressed out? I take that as on your way here. Maybe you were on your way to work, running late and stuck in traffic. Or were you at home paying your monthly bills? Maybe you were just watching the 5 o'clock news. Your heart starts racing, your palms get sweaty, your stomach jumps into your throat. We experience these body sensations so often, we don't even know the difference now. So indulge me for a minute. If you have anything in your hands, just set it aside. Plant your feet firmly on the ground. Close your eyes. Inhale with me, in through the nose. Exhale through the mouth. Inhale through the nose. Exhale through the mouth. When you're ready, open your eyes. Congratulations, you just practiced self-care. It can be that simple. Unfortunately, the $10 billion self-care industry doesn't want you to think so. There's this myth that's fed by Instagram posts and countless advertisements that self-care is a spa day, pedicures and Prosecco, a weekend-long Netflix binge, anything pumpkin spice related. All these indulgences are great, but they're not self-care. We're left chasing these perfect self-care experiences and they don't actually restore us. So we're left with a question, if that's not self-care, what is self-care and how do I practice it? Self-care is deliberately taking care of your well-being through restorative activities. One of the greatest threats for our well-being is physical and emotional stress. Stress is one of the leading causes of healthcare issues in America. And we experience it every day. We experience stress by what we put in our bodies, what we put on our bodies, the thoughts that we think, and the choices that we make throughout our day. Some of the most stressful things that we can put in our bodies are sugar, alcohol, excessive caffeine, and processed foods. Those are also some of the most consumed items in America. So with all this stress impacting our immune system, our energy levels, our emotional well-being, it's essential that our self-care practice does the opposite. About a year ago, a coworker asked me what I did for self-care. I cringed when she asked me that question. I said, I eat and I sleep and that's enough, totally brushing her off. At the time, I was managing a high volume retail business in Washington, DC. My husband and I were starting a company and we're raising our 2-year-old son. I started every day with coffee and a scone, went to work, had very few breaks, and finished my day watching Netflix and scrolling on my phone. I was in complete denial about what I needed to do to take care of myself. Ultimately, I burn out and I quit my job. I decided to pursue a passion of mine, and I began working as a labor doula and a childbirth educator. Now, a large aspect of that job is to support pregnant women and prepare pregnant women to be as relaxed as possible during what could be a stressful event in a stressful environment. And I learned really quickly that to be successful at that, I had to be a relaxing presence, which meant I had to take care of myself. And that's when I discovered how to practice self-care. My foundation began as a diet rich in fruits, vegetables, and whole plant-based foods. And then I added in 3 restorative activities to make my self-care practice. The first, moments of stillness and in silence. We just practiced this a few minutes ago. We are bombarded by noise every day. The TV, the radio, traffic, our kids yelling at us. But the loudest noise of all is the voice in our heads. We have roughly 60,000 thoughts a day, and for some of us, 80% of those thoughts are negative. When we meditate and have moments of stillness and silence, it brings awareness to that internal voice. And when we have that awareness, that's when we can choose what thoughts we're holding on to and which we want to let go of. We can also adjust the volume on how loud that internal voice is. The first time I meditated, I was sitting in a chair and I immediately got squirmy and my back started hurting and my internal voice got so loud and it was talking about all the things I should be getting done on my to-do list versus sitting doing nothing. But I committed to 5 minutes a day, and slowly but surely that voice got quieter. I have one suggestion for starting a powerful meditation or stillness practice, and it's simply to be comfortable. You don't need to sit in a straight back, rigid chair. You can actually be comfortable on your couch. I actually encourage you to be as comfortable as possible without falling asleep. The second restorative activity I added in was movement. This could be walking, running, dancing, yoga, jumping jacks on your living room floor. Our bodies are meant to move. And when we move and when we exercise, it creates endorphins, which first, they help sleep, which naturally reduces our stress. And it also sends a positive feeling through the body that's similar to that of morphine. You don't need a fancy gym or trainer to do this, although they may help sometimes. And just 10 minutes a day makes a difference. The last restorative activity I added in was time in nature. According to environmental psychology, time in nature will improve your mood, reduce stress, and improve cognitive function. And the Environmental Protection Agency says that the average person spends 93% of their life indoors. So we're left with this incredible opportunity to support our well-being simply by going outside. We are animals of nature, and we often live completely disconnected from our natural environment. We may go days, if not weeks, without our bare hands or feet touching the ground. My son, he's almost 3 years old. He's the most kinesthetic child out there. He loves being outside. If I let him, he'd spend all day outside, in the backyard, at the beach. And when he's outside, he's not just being outside. He is rubbing his hands into the dirt. He is touching leaves, trees, and catching frogs. And I could never understand why his shoes didn't stay on his feet for more than 5 minutes. But maybe he was onto something. The term earthing is now being used to describe your bare hands or feet on the ground, our earth. And there's a renowned cardiologist who says that the reduction of inflammation due to earthing can actually be documented by infrared imaging and white blood cell count. Some of the other benefits include reduced stress, improved sleep, improved circulation. So it's no surprise to me that when my son spends most of the day outside, he naps, he sleeps like a rock, He eats everything I give him, and there's very few emotional outbursts. When you combine these activities and practice them daily, it will support your mood, increase your energy, increase your joy. Imagine if you practice self-care for 30 minutes a day, 10 minutes of stillness, 10 minutes of movement, 10 minutes of time in nature, on top of a diet that is rich in whole plant-based foods. That's over 180 hours of self-care in a year. But I'm so busy. When am I going to get time for 30 minutes a day of self-care? Well, we can start by looking at the 5 hours a day that the average person watches TV, or the 50 minutes a day that we spend on social media. We can start there. But before you get worried about adding a self-care practice onto your never-ending to-do list, remember that it is a practice. It's not about getting it right or having the perfect self-care photos for your social media. It's about showing up for yourself every day. What would be possible for you if you showed up for yourself? Thank you.
So this is really something that we have incorporated into our clinic throughout this pandemic, is the idea of self-care, right? And interventions don't always have to be super clinical. The interventions really are what is going to work for people. And so we have done sessions outside. During the height of the pandemic, when we were on telehealth, we would say to a kiddo, okay, we're gonna have session on your mom's phone today. Get the phone, get out in the backyard. Like, let's do this outside. Let's get moving. Let's talk about what you're eating. So these are all things when we talk about mental health, it's not always about something super clinical. It's about taking care of ourselves, right? And it really can be that commonplace. So as I said, we use a lot of that, and that's something that everybody in this room can take a piece of and do. It's a way that we can all start to take back a piece of our own mental health, right? For you to be able to help someone that you might know, right? Who maybe isn't quite ready to say, I have a mental health problem, I need to go see a professional, but maybe you could encourage them to get out for a walk with you, or to, listen to music, or to eat healthier, right? These are all little things that we can do in our day-to-day life. We need to refuel and we need to rebuild, right? So we need to understand our warning signs, okay? We need to define our supports, the people, the places, and the activities in our lives. Define what is in our control and out of our control. Take that time for stillness, take the time for music, and take the time for nature, just to recap everything that was in that video. There's a lot of resources out there. And I'm going to give this, Kate, I can send you this PowerPoint afterwards and you can disseminate it out to the group. Tons and tons of self-help stuff out there, right? There's some great podcasts, and I just want to give you guys a few. The Happiness Lab, Psychologist Off the Clock, Mentally Flexible, I'm just going to really promote because Tom Parks, who is the moderator of that, used to work for us here at CJR, and he is just a phenomenal human being. And so he has a great podcast. So when we talked about, I talked a few minutes ago about like our environment and that constant input of the 5 o'clock news and the social media, right? That can be really toxic at times. Try an input of like a podcast that might, give you some positivity, right? A different perspective. Some great books. The Reality Slap, Unwinding Anxiety, some great websites, the Daily Om, as well as apps. Down Dog Yoga is one that has short yoga workouts. You can, I think anything from like a minute on up, so you can put it on your phone and do yoga throughout your day. Happify is another great one. Wobot is a really interesting one that it challenges your thoughts. So it'll like come on throughout the day and it'll ask you how you're doing, and then it'll start to challenge you and try to get you out of like negative thinking patterns. Headspace is another good one. And Calm's another great one that has all sorts of relaxation activities. It even has adult bedtime stories, which is pretty cool if you can't fall asleep. So just a lot of different stuff out there. And again, these I think are really all some of this existed pre-pandemic, but when we talk about what good came out of this, and again, like I said before, that awareness of mental health, there is so much stuff out there right now for self-help, right? So just some great resources.